The morning sunlight filtered through thin curtains as Melissa Ortega stood before the mirror in her small apartment bedroom. Her fingers, marked with small scars from years of service, moved with practiced precision over the buttons of her marine dress blues. Each medal and ribbon told a story, 16 years of stories to be exact. She smoothed down the fabric one last time and took a deep breath. Today wasn't about her service, though. Today was about Robert. The clock on her bedside table read 7:15 a.m., 2 hours until the ceremony would begin. Melissa had been awake since 5, unable to contain the mixture of pride and nervousness that had settled in her stomach. Her son was graduating from Naval Academy Preparatory School today, and nothing, not the lingering pain in her left knee from an old combat injury, not the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, not even the memories that sometimes ambushed her in quiet moments would diminish this day. "Mom, are you ready yet?" Robert's voice called from the kitchen. "The coffee's getting cold." Melissa smiled at her reflection, at the woman who had somehow managed to raise a son alone after her husband Thomas had been killed in action 14 years ago. She remembered how small Robert had been then, just 7 years old, trying to understand why his father wouldn't be coming home. Coming. She called back, giving herself one final look. The uniform still fit perfectly, even after her retirement 3 years ago. She had insisted on wearing it today. It wasn't just about tradition or protocol. It was about honoring the path that had led both her and her son to this point. In the kitchen, Robert was already dressed in his service whites, looking so much like his father that it made Melissa's heart catch. He handed her a mug of coffee, made just the way she liked it, strong with just a touch of sugar. "You look like a recruiting poster," he said with a grin, but his eyes were serious as they took in the sight of her in full uniform. Dad would have been so proud today. Melissa took a sip of coffee to hide the sudden rush of emotion. "He'd have been proud of you, not me," she said after a moment. "Full scholarship to the prep school, and now heading to the Naval Academy itself." "That's all you, kiddo." Robert shook his head. "No way, you worked 3 jobs sometimes. You never missed a single school event, even when you were deployed and had to video call in at crazy hours. You helped me study for every test." He paused. "I remember when I was 10, and you came straight from the base to my science fair still in your camis because your relief was late." Melissa remembered too. She had been exhausted, running on nothing but determination and the fear of letting her son down. There had been so many moments like that over the years, the constant balancing act between serving her country and raising her boy. "We should get going," she said, glancing at the clock. "Traffic might be bad and I want to get good seats." They drove mostly in silence, both lost in thought as the car moved through the morning traffic. The radio played quietly in the background, some pop song that Melissa didn't recognize but that made Robert tap his fingers against his knee. "Are you nervous?" she asked finally, glancing over at her son. Robert shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made her smile. "A little. Not about graduating, but about what comes next. The academy's going to be tough." "You can handle tough," Melissa said with absolute certainty. "You've been handling tough your whole life." The Naval Academy Preparatory School campus came into view, its buildings sharp against the clear blue sky. Cars were already filling the parking lots, families arriving early to claim the best seats for the ceremony. As they walked toward the main auditorium, Melissa felt eyes on her uniform. She was used to it, the mixture of respect, curiosity, and sometimes judgment that civilians directed toward service members. She kept her back straight and her chin up, the way she'd been taught as a young recruit herself, the way she'd lived her entire adult life. "I need to go check in with my class," Robert said as they approached the building. "They want us backstage an hour early," Melissa nodded. "I'll find us good seats." Robert hesitated, then surprised her with a quick, tight hug. "Thanks, Mom, for everything." Before she could respond, he was gone, walking quickly toward a side entrance where other young men and women in uniform were gathering. Melissa watched him go, remembering the little boy who had once clung to her leg on the first day of kindergarten, terrified to let go. Inside the auditorium, families were already claiming rows of seats, setting up cameras and waving to each other across the room. Melissa spotted several other military uniforms scattered throughout the crowd, parents like her who had served or were still serving. She nodded respectfully to a Navy officer who caught her eye, receiving a small smile in return. Finding a seat near the front, but off to the side, Melissa settled in to wait. She pulled out her phone to check the time and saw a text message from her sister Diane. "Drive safe. Take lots of pictures. So proud of both of you." Melissa smiled and sent back a quick thanks. Her family had been her backbone through everything. Through Thomas's death, through her deployments when they had taken Robert in as their own, through her struggles with PTSD after her final tour in Afghanistan. They had never once made her feel like she was failing as a mother, even when she had felt it herself. The auditorium was filling up quickly now. A young couple with a baby took the seats next to her, the mother juggling the infant and a diaper bag while the father searched for pacifiers in his pockets. Melissa offered to hold the bag while they settled in. "Thank you," the woman said gratefully. Then her eyes widened slightly as she took in Melissa's uniform. "Oh, you're a Marine." "Retired," Melissa clarified with a smile. "Staff Sergeant. Our daughter, the one graduating today, she's hoping to become a Marine officer after college," the father said, pride evident in his voice. "Any advice we can pass along?" For the next 20 minutes, Melissa found herself sharing stories and advice with the couple, careful to balance honesty about the challenges with the true rewards of service. It felt good to talk about it, to remember the camaraderie and purpose that had defined so much of her life. More people filtered in, the noise level rising as the auditorium filled to capacity. Melissa checked her watch again. 30 minutes until the ceremony would begin. Her knee was starting to ache from sitting, so she decided to take a quick walk to stretch it out. As she moved toward the back of the auditorium, memories washed over her, not just of her own military career, but of everything that had led to this day. The night she'd told 7-year-old Robert that his father wasn't coming home. The way he had slept with his father's dog tags for months afterward. His first day of high school, when he'd announced his intention to follow both his parents into military service. There had been hard years. The deployments when she'd missed birthdays and holidays, communicating with her son through stuttering video calls and letters that arrived weeks late. The nightmares that had followed her home from her third tour, leaving her gasping for breath in the dark while trying not to wake Robert in the next room. The endless juggling of bills on a military salary, especially after medical issues had forced her early retirement. But there had been beautiful moments too, watching Robert grow into a thoughtful, determined young man with his father's easy laugh and her own stubborn resilience. The day his acceptance letter to the prep school had arrived, how they had danced around their tiny kitchen in celebration. The quiet evenings when they had talked about Thomas, keeping his memory alive through stories. Melissa hadn't realized she had tears in her eyes until a passing woman offered her a tissue. "Thanks," she said, quickly wiping at her face. "Just a proud mom moment." The woman smiled knowingly. "I've had a few of those myself today. Which one is yours?" "Robert Ortega. Headed to the Naval Academy after this." "Following in your footsteps, I see," the woman said, nodding at Melissa's uniform. "His father's, too. He was a Marine. Killed in action when our son was young." The woman's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "He'd be very proud today." "Yes," Melissa agreed, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "He would be." A voice over the loudspeaker announced that the ceremony would begin in 15 minutes and families should take their seats. Melissa thanked the woman and made her way back to her spot, noticing that the auditorium was now almost completely full. As she sat down, she caught sight of a group of men in navy dress uniforms entering through a side door, officers coming to support the graduating class. One of them, a tall man with commander's insignia, looked vaguely familiar, though Melissa couldn't place him. The lights dimmed slightly and the room began to quiet. Melissa straightened her uniform jacket one more time and focused her attention on the stage where her son would soon appear. After everything, the sacrifices, the hardships, the moments of doubt, they had made it here together. Whatever came next, she knew they could handle it. When the music started and the graduates began to file in, Melissa felt her heart swell with a pride so intense it was almost painful. Somewhere in that line of sharply dressed young men and women was her son, her and Thomas's son, taking his first steps toward a future they had both dreamed of for him. She had no way of knowing that in less than 30 minutes this perfect moment would be disrupted, or that what followed would become a story that would spread far beyond the walls of this auditorium. For now, Staff Sergeant Melissa Ortega simply watched and waited for her son to appear, savoring this moment she had worked so hard to reach. The graduation ceremony began with all the pomp and circumstance Melissa had expected. A color guard presented the flag, the national anthem played, and the school superintendent took the stage to welcome the families. Melissa sat straight-backed in her seat, her eyes scanning each row of graduates until she spotted Robert. Even from a distance, she could see his posture was perfect, shoulders squared, chin up just as she had taught him. "They look so grown up, don't they?" whispered the woman next to her, whose daughter was also graduating. Melissa nodded, unable to find words for the mixture of pride and nostalgia washing over her. It seemed like just yesterday that Robert had been playing with toy soldiers on their living room floor, making explosion sounds with his mouth and declaring he would be brave like Daddy and Mommy when he grew up. The superintendent was introducing the guest speaker, a retired admiral with decades of service, when Melissa felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find two men in dark suits standing in the aisle beside her row. Their matching earpieces and stern expressions marked them clearly as security personnel. "Ma'am, could you step into the aisle for a moment?" the taller of the two asked quietly. Confused but not wanting to cause a disruption, Melissa excused herself and stepped out of her row. The security guards led her a few steps away from the seating area, just far enough that they wouldn't disturb other families. "Is something wrong?" Melissa asked, keeping her voice low. The shorter guard, a man with a closely trimmed beard and a name tag reading Phillips, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we've received a complaint about your uniform." Melissa blinked in surprise. "My uniform? I don't understand." "The school has a new protocol this year," explained the taller guard, whose tag read Bentley. "Military uniforms in the civilian seating areas need special clearance. It's a security measure." Melissa looked from one guard to the other, trying to make sense of their words. She had worn her uniform to countless school events over the years, including Robert's high school graduation just a year earlier. No one had ever suggested it might be a problem. "I'm a retired Marine Staff Sergeant," she explained calmly. "My son is graduating today. I've always worn my uniform to his important events." Phillips shifted uncomfortably. "We understand, ma'am, but the directive is clear. Military personnel and veterans in uniform should be seated in the designated military visitors section, not the general audience area." Melissa glanced toward where he gestured, a small cordoned-off area at the far back corner of the auditorium, behind several pillars that partially blocked the view of the stage. She could barely see the podium from there, let alone where the graduates were seated. "I wouldn't be able to see my son receive his honors from there," she said, feeling a knot form in her stomach, "and he wouldn't be able to see me." "We're just following the new security protocols," Bentley said, his tone suggesting the matter was settled. "You can either move to the military section or—" He hesitated. "Or what?" Melissa asked, though she already knew what was coming. "Or you'll need to change out of your uniform if you want to remain in the general seating area." A hot flush of embarrassment crept up Melissa's neck. She had no change of clothes with her. She hadn't thought she would need any. The uniform wasn't just fabric and buttons to her. It represented everything she had given to her country, everything she had overcome, and everything she had taught her son about duty and honor. "This is ridiculous," she said, working to keep her voice steady. "I'm here as a mother, not as a security threat." Around them, several nearby families had begun to notice the conversation. Melissa could feel their curious glances, hear their whispered questions to one another. The last thing she wanted was to create a scene that would detract from Robert's big day. "Could I speak to whoever is in charge of security?" she asked, hoping there might be room for reason. Phillips shook his head. "The directive comes directly from the administration, ma'am. We're just doing our job." Melissa took a deep breath, considering her options. She could argue further, but that would only cause more disruption. She could move to the military section, but then she'd miss seeing Robert up close. Or she could leave and wait outside for the ceremony to end. None of these choices felt right. This was a moment she had been looking forward to for years, a milestone in her son's life that she had sacrificed so much to help him reach. The thought of missing it made her throat tight with emotion. "Ma'am, we need you to make a decision," Bentley pressed. "The ceremony is continuing." Indeed, the guest speaker was now at the podium, his voice echoing through the auditorium as he spoke about service and sacrifice, words that felt bitterly ironic to Melissa in that moment. More people were staring now. A middle-aged couple a few rows away were whispering and pointing. An elderly man with a veteran's cap frowned deeply as he watched the interaction. Melissa felt exposed, as if she were back in basic training being dressed down in front of her unit. "Is there a problem here?" The new voice came from behind Melissa. She turned to see an older woman approaching, tall, silver-haired, and dressed in a tailored navy blue suit with a school administration pin on her lapel. "Dr. Chen," Phillips acknowledged, straightening his posture slightly. "We were just explaining the uniform policy to this guest." The woman, Dr. Chen, looked at Melissa, taking in the uniform, the medals, and the barely contained frustration on her face. "I'm the assistant dean," she explained to Melissa. "What seems to be the issue?" Melissa quickly explained the situation, keeping her voice level and professional despite the emotions churning inside her. She mentioned Robert, his father's death in service, and the tradition of wearing her uniform to all of his milestone events. Dr. Chen listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. When Melissa finished, she turned to the security guards. "The policy is about unauthorized military personnel," she said firmly. "This woman is the mother of a graduate and a decorated veteran. There's no security concern here." Bentley shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, the directive was specific about uniforms in the civilian section." "I'm familiar with the directive, Mr. Bentley. I helped write it," Dr. Chen interrupted. "It was meant to prevent unauthorized individuals from using military uniforms to gain access to restricted areas, not to separate families during graduation." Hope flickered in Melissa's chest. But Phillips was already shaking his head. "With respect, Dr. Chen, our instructions came from the head of security, who reports directly to the superintendent. We can't make exceptions without authorization from him." The brief moment of hope faded. Dr. Chen looked genuinely regretful as she turned back to Melissa. "I apologize for this," she said quietly. "I'll speak to the superintendent immediately about clarifying this policy, but it may take time to sort out." Melissa nodded, resignation settling over her. The ceremony was continuing, precious minutes ticking by. Soon they would begin calling graduates names. "It's all right," she said, though it wasn't. "I don't want to cause any more disruption. I'll just wait outside, Mom." The familiar voice cut through Melissa's thoughts. She turned to see Robert standing at the end of the aisle, confusion and concern written across his face. He must have spotted the commotion from his seat and come to investigate during the speech. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between his mother and the security guards. Melissa opened her mouth to explain, but Bentley spoke first. "Sir, you need to return to your seat. The graduates aren't supposed to leave during the ceremony." Robert ignored him, his focus entirely on his mother. "Why are they talking to you?" Melissa sighed. "There's apparently a policy about military uniforms in the regular seating section. They want me to either move to the back or change clothes." Robert's expression darkened. He looked at his uniform, then at his mother's, then at the guards. "This is my mother," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "She served 3 tours in Afghanistan. She raised me alone after my father was killed in action. And you're telling her she can't sit where she can see me graduate because she wore her uniform?" The security guards exchanged uncomfortable glances but held their ground. "It's protocol, sir," Phillips repeated. "We don't make the rules." Robert turned to Dr. Chen. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is wrong." Dr. Chen nodded. "I agree, Cadet Ortega. I'm going to speak to the superintendent right now, but there's no time." Robert interrupted, glancing at the stage where the guest speaker was concluding his remarks. "They're about to start calling names." Melissa touched her son's arm gently. "Robert, it's okay. Go back to your seat. This is your day, and I don't want anything to spoil it. I'll watch from outside." "No," Robert said firmly. "If you have to leave, then I'm not participating." A small crowd had gathered now, other parents and a few graduates who had noticed the confrontation. Whispers rippled through the group, and Melissa could feel dozens of eyes on them. "Robert," she began, mortified at the thought of him missing his own graduation because of her. But he shook his head, his jaw set in a way that reminded her painfully of his father. "You've never missed a single important moment in my life, Mom. Not one. You've always been there, even when it wasn't easy. I'm not letting them make you leave." The determination in his eyes brought a lump to Melissa's throat. This was the boy she had raised, stubborn, principled, loyal to a fault. In that moment, despite the embarrassment and frustration of the situation, she had never been prouder. Dr. Chen was speaking into a small radio now, presumably trying to reach someone with the authority to resolve the situation. The The security guards looked increasingly uncomfortable as more people noticed the disruption. From the stage, the superintendent's voice announced that they would now begin presenting the certificates to the graduates. "Time had run out, ma'am," Bentley said, his voice firmer now. "We need to ask you to leave the auditorium if you're not going to comply with the policy." Melissa straightened her shoulders. A lifetime of military discipline helping her maintain composure even as disappointment and anger swirled inside her. She had faced worse than this, much worse. She would not break down, not here, not now. "I understand," she said. She turned to Robert, touching his cheek gently. "Go back to your seat." "That's an order, cadet." Robert looked like he wanted to argue, but years of responding to her mom voice won out. He reluctantly nodded. "I'll find you right after," he promised. "As soon as it's over." "I'll be waiting," she assured him, forcing a smile. "I'm so proud of you, Robert." As her son reluctantly returned to his section, Melissa gathered her purse and prepared to make her way toward the exit, dignity intact despite the humiliation burning in her chest. What should have been one of the happiest days of her life had turned into a painful reminder that even after 16 years of service, there were still places where she didn't quite belong. What she didn't know was that someone else had been watching the entire exchange, someone who recognized her from years ago and who was already setting in motion events that would turn this embarrassing moment into something entirely unexpected. Melissa walked toward the exit with her head held high, though each step felt heavier than the last. Years of military discipline helped her maintain her composure, but inside her heart was breaking. The sounds of the ceremony continued behind her, the superintendent's voice announcing the beginning of the certificate presentations, the polite applause from proud families. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, fighting the urge to look back. "Staff Sergeant Ortega?" The voice was low and came from her right. Melissa turned to see a man in a crisp navy dress uniform, standing in the shadows near the exit. Something about him seemed familiar. The weathered face, the watchful eyes that missed nothing. It took her a moment to place him. "Lieutenant Commander Wilson?" she asked, surprised to find herself face to face with someone from her past. The man nodded, a slight smile crossing his face. "It's Commander now, actually. Been a while, Ortega." Memories clicked into place. David Wilson. They had been deployed together in Afghanistan during her second tour. He had been a young SEAL officer then, leading a team that had worked alongside her Marine unit on several joint operations. They hadn't been close, but they had respected each other, the way people do when they've shared dangerous situations. "Congratulations on the promotion," she said automatically, military courtesy ingrained after so many years. Then reality reasserted itself and her smile faded. "I'm sorry, but I need to step outside. They won't let me stay in the auditorium in uniform." Wilson's expression hardened. "I saw what happened. That's why I came to find you." He glanced back toward the ceremony, then checked his watch. "Your son is Robert Ortega?" Melissa nodded, surprised. "You know him? I teach advanced tactical operations as a guest instructor here sometimes. Had your boy in my class last semester." He mentioned his mother was a Marine. Wilson paused. "Never put it together that it was you until I saw you just now." "He's a good kid," Melissa said, pride momentarily overcoming her disappointment. "Works hard. One of my best students," Wilson agreed. "Reminds me of someone else I knew. Stubborn, determined, doesn't know when to quit." There was respect in his eyes as he looked at her. "He told me about his father, too. Thomas Ortega was a good Marine. I was sorry to hear he didn't make it home." The mention of her late husband's name made Melissa's throat tight. "Thank you." Wilson was still watching her with that calculating look she remembered from years ago, the expression he wore when forming a plan. "Your boy also mentioned how you never missed a single important event in his life, no matter what. Said you once video called into his science fair from a forward operating base in the middle of a sandstorm." Despite everything, Melissa smiled at the memory. The connection was terrible. I could barely see his project, but I wasn't going to miss it. And now some rent-a-cops want to make you miss his graduation because of a uniform you earned the right to wear. Wilson shook his head, disgust evident in his voice. "That's not happening on my watch." He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. Melissa watched, confused. "What are you doing?" "Calling in some favors," Wilson replied without looking up. "I'm not the only one here today with connections to the teams." Melissa recognized the shorthand. The teams meant Navy SEALs. She knew Wilson had continued in special operations after their paths had crossed in Afghanistan, rising through the ranks to become a respected commander. "I appreciate the thought," she said, "but I don't want to cause any more trouble. This is Robert's day, and I've already created enough of a disturbance." Wilson finished his message and slipped the phone back into his pocket. "With all due respect, Staff Sergeant, this isn't just about you or even about your son. It's about what's right. Those of us who served, we look out for each other. That doesn't stop when the uniform comes off." Before Melissa could respond, the door behind them opened and Dr. Chen stepped out, looking slightly flustered. "Mrs. Ortega, I've spoken with the superintendent," she said. "He agrees that there's been a misinterpretation of the policy. You're welcome to return to your seat." Melissa felt a wave of relief, though it was tempered by the embarrassment of the whole situation. "Thank you." Dr. Chen looked at Wilson, taking in his uniform and the commander's insignia. "Are you a friend of the family, sir?" "Old colleague," Wilson said simply. "We served together." Dr. Chen nodded, then turned back to Melissa. "They're about halfway through the B's in the alphabet. You have time to get back to your seat before they call your son." As the assistant dean headed back inside, Melissa turned to Wilson. "Thank you for whatever you did to help." Wilson shook his head. "I didn't do anything yet, but I'm glad it worked out." He held the door open for her. "After you, Staff Sergeant." As Melissa re-entered the auditorium, she noticed several people watching her return. Some looked curious, others sympathetic. She kept her eyes forward, focusing on getting back to her seat with minimal disruption. The ceremony continued, names being called one by one as graduates walked across the stage to receive their certificates. She had just settled back into her place when her phone vibrated in her pocket. Normally, she would never check it during such an important event, but something made her pull it out discreetly. There was a text message from an unknown number. "Look for us when they call your son's name." "You're not alone here," so Melissa frowned, puzzled by the cryptic message. She glanced around the auditorium but couldn't spot Wilson anywhere. Tucking the phone away, she redirected her attention to the ceremony, determined not to miss a moment more. The superintendent was working through the F names now, each graduate standing to applause as their achievements were read aloud. Melissa found herself counting down the letters until they would reach O for Ortega, her heart beating faster as the moment approached. Meanwhile, backstage, Robert stood with his fellow graduates waiting for his name to be called. His mind wasn't fully on the ceremony, though. He kept thinking about what had happened with his mother, anger and disappointment competing with the pride he should have been feeling on this day. "Hey, Ortega," whispered a classmate standing next to him. "Isn't that Commander Wilson talking to the superintendent?" Robert looked where his friend was pointing. Indeed, Commander Wilson was standing at the side of the stage, speaking intently to the school superintendent. The older man was nodding, looking surprised and then thoughtful. "Wonder what that's about," his friend murmured. Robert had no idea, but something told him it had to do with his mother. Commander Wilson had asked him about his family once after class, when Robert had mentioned his parents' military service. The commander had seemed particularly interested when Robert mentioned his mother's name and unit. "Maybe he just knows someone graduating," Robert replied, though he didn't believe it himself. On stage, the superintendent had reached the M names. Not much longer now. In the audience, Melissa watched each graduate cross the stage, applauding politely while her mind raced ahead to the moment when Robert's name would be called. She was so focused that she almost didn't notice when a man in a navy dress uniform took the empty seat across the aisle from her. Then another uniformed man appeared a few rows ahead, and another at the back of the auditorium. She did a double take, suddenly realizing there were Navy officers in formal dress uniforms positioned throughout the audience, all wearing the distinctive insignia of Navy SEALs. They hadn't been there earlier. She would have noticed. They seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, taking up strategic positions around the room. One of them caught her eye and gave her a nearly imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Melissa felt a chill run down her spine. What was happening? As the superintendent announced Kevin Nelson, Melissa counted the uniformed men she could see from her position. 6. No, 7 at least. All SEALs, all watching the ceremony with the same alert, focused expression she recognized from her days working alongside special operations teams. Her phone buzzed again. "Ready?" She looked up, scanning the room until she spotted Wilson standing at the back, his eyes on her. He gave her a slight nod, then touched his ear as if adjusting an earpiece. A signal on stage, the superintendent cleared his throat. Next, we have Robert Ortega, graduating with honors in advanced tactical operations and engineering. Cadet Ortega has been accepted to the United States Naval Academy and has received commendations from 3 of his instructors for leadership and initiative. As Robert stepped forward to receive his certificate, Melissa felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This was the moment, the culmination of years of sacrifice and hard work, not just by Robert, but by both of them. But something unexpected was happening. As Robert's name was called, she saw movement throughout the auditorium. One by one, the Navy SEALs she had spotted were standing up, coming to attention in perfect unison. Wilson at the back was the first on his feet, followed by the others. 7, 8, 9. Melissa counted in astonishment. 12 in total, spread throughout the room, all standing at perfect attention as her son crossed the stage. The audience noticed. Heads turned, whispers spread. Even the superintendent paused, looking out at the unexpected display with surprise. Robert himself stopped mid-stride, clearly confused by what was happening. Wilson's voice carried clearly from the back of the room. Staff Sergeant Melissa Ortega, mother of Cadet Robert Ortega. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Bronze Star with Valor. Purple Heart. A Marine who never left anyone behind, including her son. The other SEALs remained at attention, a silent tribute that spoke volumes to everyone in the room. The security guards who had confronted Melissa earlier stood frozen, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning recognition. Melissa felt the eyes of the entire auditorium turn to her. Under normal circumstances, such attention would have made her uncomfortable. But in this moment, surrounded by this unexpected show of respect from America's most elite warriors, she felt only gratitude and a fierce pride. She rose to her feet, returning the salute that Wilson and his men offered, a gesture normally reserved for fellow officers, but in this case, a sign of profound respect from one group of warriors to another. Robert, still on stage, straightened his posture and saluted as well, first to the SEALs standing throughout the room, and then, with particular pride, to his mother. The superintendent, recovering from his surprise, spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, as we can see, we are honored to have not only our graduates with us today, but also those who have served, and those who continue to serve our country. Please join me in acknowledging Staff Sergeant Ortega and our other distinguished military guests. The audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls of the auditorium. People who had been whispering about the confrontation earlier were now applauding the loudest, caught up in the unexpected moment of recognition and respect. As the applause continued, Melissa caught Robert's eye across the distance. In his gaze, she saw everything that didn't need to be said between them. The pride, the love, the shared journey that had brought them to this point. Whatever came next, this moment would stay with both of them forever. What had begun as a day of embarrassment and disappointment had transformed into something entirely different, a powerful reminder that while protocols and rules had their place, some bonds went deeper. The bonds of family, the bonds of service, the bonds between those who had stood together when it mattered most. As Robert completed his walk across the stage, certificate in hand, Melissa knew that Wilson had given them both something precious, not just the restoration of her dignity, but a message to her son about the community he was joining, a brotherhood and sisterhood that extended far beyond uniforms and rank insignias. And somewhere, she liked to think Thomas was watching too, proud of the son they had raised and the woman who had carried on after he was gone. The remainder of the graduation ceremony continued with a different energy in the room. The standing ovation eventually subsided, but the atmosphere had been permanently altered. Melissa noticed how the security guards, Bentley and Phillips, kept glancing in her direction, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and uncertainty. Dr. Chen, the assistant dean, had taken a seat near the stage, occasionally looking back at Melissa with what appeared to be genuine respect. As the superintendent called the remaining graduates, Melissa remained focused on the ceremony, but she was acutely aware of the 12 Navy SEALs stationed throughout the auditorium. They had returned to their seats after their unexpected display, but their presence was unmistakable. She found herself wondering who they were and why they had chosen to stand with her in such a public way. When the last graduate had received their certificate, the superintendent returned to the podium for closing remarks. He spoke about the future that awaited these young men and women, about service and sacrifice, words that resonated differently now after what had just happened. Before we conclude today's ceremony, the superintendent said, deviating from the printed program, I want to acknowledge something extraordinary that we witnessed here. Many of you may not fully understand the significance of what occurred when Cadet Ortega's name was called. Melissa felt her cheeks warm as attention once again turned in her direction. What you saw, the superintendent continued, was a spontaneous show of respect from members of our Naval Special Warfare community, our Navy SEALs, for a fellow service member. It serves as a powerful reminder of the bonds that unite those who serve, bonds that transcend branches of service, rank, and time. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. It also reminds us that behind every graduate here today, there is a story of support and sacrifice. Parents who worked extra hours, family members who stepped in during difficult times, and in some cases, like with Staff Sergeant Ortega, those who balanced service to country with raising the next generation of leaders. Robert, seated with his fellow graduates, sat a little straighter, his eyes fixed on his mother across the auditorium. With that in mind, the superintendent concluded, I'd like to invite all our graduates to join their families for a reception in the East Courtyard. Congratulations to the class of 2025. As the ceremony officially ended and families began making their way toward the exits, Melissa remained in her seat, unsure of what to do next. People were looking at her as they passed, some nodding respectfully, others smiling. An elderly man wearing a Korean War veteran's cap stopped to shake her hand. That was something to see, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Reminded me of how it should be. Before Melissa could respond, she felt a presence beside her. Commander Wilson had made his way through the crowd to her side. Staff Sergeant, he greeted her formally. Commander, she returned, standing to face him properly. I don't know how to thank you for what you did. Wilson shook his head. No thanks necessary. When I recognized you and saw what was happening, I made a few calls. Turns out there are quite a few team guys here today. Some with kids graduating, others as official representatives. 12 of you, Melissa noted. That's not a coincidence. Meanwhile, backstage, Robert stood with his fellow graduates waiting for his name to be called. His mind wasn't fully on the ceremony, though. He kept thinking about what had happened with his mother, anger and disappointment competing with the pride he should have been feeling on this day. Hey, Ortega, whispered a classmate standing next to him. Isn't that Commander Wilson talking to the superintendent? Robert looked where his friend was pointing. Indeed, Commander Wilson was standing at the side of the stage, speaking intently to the school superintendent. The older man was nodding, looking surprised and then thoughtful. Wonder what that's about, his friend murmured. Robert had no idea, but something told him it had to do with his mother. Commander Wilson had asked him about his family once after class, when Robert had mentioned his parents' military service. The commander had seemed particularly interested when Robert mentioned his mother's name and unit. Maybe he just knows someone graduating, Robert replied, though he didn't believe it himself. On stage, the superintendent had reached the M names. Not much longer now. In the audience, Melissa watched each graduate cross the stage, applauding politely while her mind raced ahead to the moment when Robert's name would be called. She was so focused that she almost didn't notice when a man in a Navy dress uniform took the empty seat across the aisle from her. Then another uniformed man appeared a few rows ahead, and another at the back of the auditorium. She did a double take, suddenly realizing there were Navy officers in formal dress uniforms positioned throughout the audience, all wearing the distinctive insignia of Navy SEALs. They hadn't been there earlier. She would have noticed. They seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, taking up strategic positions around the room. One of them caught her eye and gave her a nearly imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Melissa felt a chill run down her spine. What was happening? As the superintendent announced Kevin Nelson, Melissa counted the uniformed men she could see from her position. 6. No, 7 at least. All SEALs, all watching the ceremony with the same alert, focused expression she recognized from her days working alongside special operations teams. Her phone buzzed again. Ready? She looked up, scanning the room until she spotted Wilson standing at the back. his eyes on her. He gave her a slight nod, then touched his ear as if adjusting an earpiece. A signal on stage, the superintendent cleared his throat. Next, we have Robert Ortega, graduating with honors in Advanced Tactical Operations and Engineering. Cadet Ortega has been accepted to the United States Naval Academy and has received commendations from 3 of his instructors for leadership and initiative. As Robert stepped forward to receive his certificate, Melissa felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This was the moment, the culmination of years of sacrifice and hard work, not just by Robert, but by both of them. But something unexpected was happening. As Robert's name was called, she saw movement throughout the auditorium. One by one, the Navy SEALs she had spotted were standing up, coming to attention in perfect unison. Wilson at the back was the first on his feet, followed by the others. 7, 8, 9. Melissa counted in astonishment. 12 in total, spread throughout the room, all standing at perfect attention as her son crossed the stage. The audience noticed. Heads turned, whispers spread. Even the superintendent paused, looking out at the unexpected display with surprise. Robert himself stopped mid-stride, clearly confused by what was happening. Wilson's voice carried clearly from the back of the room. Staff Sergeant Melissa Ortega, mother of Cadet Robert Ortega. 3 tours in Afghanistan, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, a Marine who never left anyone behind, including her son. The other SEALs remained at attention, a silent tribute that spoke volumes to everyone in the room. The security guards who had confronted Melissa earlier stood frozen, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning recognition. Melissa felt the eyes of the entire auditorium turn to her. Under normal circumstances, such attention would have made her uncomfortable. But in this moment, surrounded by this unexpected show of respect from America's most elite warriors, she felt only gratitude and a fierce pride. She rose to her feet, returning the salute that Wilson and his men offered, a gesture normally reserved for fellow officers, but in this case, a sign of profound respect from one group of warriors to another. Robert, still on stage, straightened his posture and saluted as well, first to the SEALs standing throughout the room, and then, with particular pride, to his mother. The superintendent, recovering from his surprise, spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, as we can see, we are honored to have not only our graduates with us today, but also those who have served, and those who continue to serve our country. Please join me in acknowledging Staff Sergeant Ortega and our other distinguished military guests. The audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls of the auditorium. People who had been whispering about the confrontation earlier were now applauding the loudest, caught up in the unexpected moment of recognition and respect. As the applause continued, Melissa caught Robert's eye across the distance. In his gaze, she saw everything that didn't need to be said between them. The pride, the love, the shared journey that had brought them to this point. Whatever came next, this moment would stay with both of them forever. What had begun as a day of embarrassment and disappointment had transformed into something entirely different, a powerful reminder that while protocols and rules had their place, some bonds went deeper. The bonds of family, the bonds of service, the bonds between those who had stood together when it mattered most. As Robert completed his walk across the stage, certificate in hand, Melissa knew that Wilson had given them both something precious, not just the restoration of her dignity, but a message to her son about the community he was joining, a brotherhood and sisterhood that extended far beyond uniforms and rank insignias. And somewhere, she liked to think Thomas was watching too, proud of the son they had raised and the woman who had carried on after he was gone. The remainder of the graduation ceremony continued with a different energy in the room. The standing ovation eventually subsided, but the atmosphere had been permanently altered. Melissa noticed how the security guards, Bentley and Phillips, kept glancing in her direction, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and uncertainty. Dr. Chen, the assistant dean, had taken a seat near the stage, occasionally looking back at Melissa with what appeared to be genuine respect. As the superintendent called the remaining graduates, Melissa remained focused on the ceremony, but she was acutely aware of the 12 Navy SEALs stationed throughout the auditorium. They had returned to their seats after their unexpected display, but their presence was unmistakable. She found herself wondering who they were and why they had chosen to stand with her in such a public way. When the last graduate had received their certificate, the superintendent returned to the podium for closing remarks. He spoke about the future that awaited these young men and women, about service and sacrifice, words that resonated differently now after what had just happened. Before we conclude today's ceremony, the superintendent said, "Deviating from the printed program, I want to acknowledge something extraordinary that we witnessed here. Many of you may not fully understand the significance of what occurred when Cadet Ortega's name was called." Melissa felt her cheeks warm as attention once again turned in her direction. "What you saw," the superintendent continued, "was a spontaneous show of respect from members of our Naval Special Warfare community, our Navy SEALs, for a fellow service member. It serves as a powerful reminder of the bonds that unite those who serve, bonds that transcend branches of service, rank, and time." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "It also reminds us that behind every graduate here today, there is a story of support and sacrifice. Parents who worked extra hours, family members who stepped in during difficult times, and in some cases, like with Staff Sergeant Ortega, those who balanced service to country with raising the next generation of leaders." Robert, seated with his fellow graduates, sat a little straighter, his eyes fixed on his mother across the auditorium. "With that in mind," the superintendent concluded, "I'd like to invite all our graduates to join their families for a reception in the East Courtyard. Congratulations to the class of 2025. As the ceremony officially ended and families began making their way toward the exits, Melissa remained in her seat, unsure of what to do next. People were looking at her as they passed, some nodding respectfully, others smiling. An elderly man wearing a Korean War veteran's cap stopped to shake her hand. "That was something to see," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Reminded me of how it should be." Before Melissa could respond, she felt a presence beside her. Commander Wilson had made his way through the crowd to her side. "Staff Sergeant," he greeted her formally. "Commander," she returned, standing to face him properly. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did." Wilson shook his head. "No thanks necessary. When I recognized you and saw what was happening, I made a few calls. Turns out there are quite a few team guys here today, some with kids graduating, others as official representatives. 12 of you," Melissa noted. "That's not a coincidence." A small smile crossed Wilson's weathered face. "Let's just say when word spread about a Marine staff sergeant being disrespected at her own son's graduation, there was no shortage of volunteers to make a statement." Melissa felt a lump forming in her throat. During her time in service, there had always been the good-natured rivalry between branches. Marines teasing Navy, Army poking fun at Air Force, but underneath it all was a bedrock of mutual respect and understanding. What she had witnessed today was that foundation made visible. "Commander Wilson." They both turned to see Robert pushing through the crowd, still in his cadet uniform. When he reached them, he came to attention and saluted sharply. "At ease, Cadet," Wilson said, returning the salute. "Congratulations on your graduation." "Thank you, sir." Robert turned to his mother, his composure breaking slightly as he pulled her into a tight hug. "Mom, are you okay?" "I couldn't believe what they tried to do." "I'm fine," Melissa assured him, holding him close for a moment before stepping back to look at him proudly. "More than fine now. You did it, Robert. You graduated with honors. Your son has a bright future ahead of him," Wilson commented. His tactical assessment scores were some of the highest I've seen in years. Robert's expression grew serious. "Sir, what happened with those SEALs standing up? Was that your doing?" Wilson glanced around the auditorium where people were still filing out. "Let's talk about this somewhere more private. The reception will be starting soon, and I think you both deserve some explanations." He led them through a side door into a quiet hallway, away from the main flow of people heading to the courtyard. 2 more men in Navy dress uniforms were waiting there, both with the unmistakable bearing of special operators. "Staff Sergeant Ortega, this is Lieutenant Commander Thomas and Chief Petty Officer Ramirez," Wilson introduced them. They were among those who stood up today. Both men shook Melissa's hand with respect. Thomas, a tall man with close-cropped gray hair and intense eyes, spoke first. "It's an honor, Staff Sergeant. Dave, Commander Wilson told us about your record. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. Not many can claim that kind of service." Melissa shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "I just did my job like everyone else." And raised a son on your own after losing your husband in action, added Ramirez, a stocky man with a quiet voice that belied his imposing presence. That takes a different kind of courage. Robert looked between the three Navy officers with growing understanding. You all coordinated what happened in there? Wilson nodded. When I saw the security guards confronting your mother, I recognized her from our deployment in Helmand province in 2011. Your mother's unit was providing security for our team during an intelligence gathering operation when we came under heavy. Fair Melissa remembered it well, a routine mission that had turned deadly in seconds. Your point man was hit, she said quietly. Compound fracture to the femur. He was bleeding out in the open. Wilson's eyes held hers, memories passing between them, and a certain Marine staff sergeant broke cover to drag him to safety, taking a bullet in the process. Robert stared at his mother, surprise evident on his face. She had never told him this story. There were many stories from her deployments that she had kept to herself, not wanting to worry him or glorify the violence she had witnessed. You never mentioned that, Robert said. It wasn't something you needed to know, Melissa replied simply. It was just doing what needed to be done. The point man was my best friend since Bud S training, Thomas interjected. He has 3 kids now, thanks to your mother. Ramirez nodded. Word gets around in the teams about who you can count on when things go sideways. Your mom's name came up more than once. Melissa felt both proud and embarrassed at their words. In the Marines, you didn't expect recognition for doing your duty. You just did what was required and moved on to the next mission. But hearing that her actions had been remembered, that they had mattered to these men years later, touched her deeply. So when you saw what was happening today, Robert began. I sent out a message to the SEAL chat group, Wilson explained. Turns out we had 12 team guys here for various reasons. Once they knew the situation, everyone was on board, but why? Melissa asked. Why go to that trouble for someone you barely knew from a different branch of service? The 3 men exchanged looks before Thomas answered. Because it was wrong what those guards were doing, he said simply, and because in our community we take care of our own. That includes anyone who stood shoulder to shoulder with us, regardless of the uniform they wore, Ramirez added. Plus, we've all had enough of watching true service and sacrifice get disrespected while people who've never been in harm's way make rules about who belongs where. A commotion at the end of the hallway drew their attention. The 2 security guards, Bentley and Phillips, were approaching, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Behind them walked a distinguished older man in a formal suit, the superintendent himself. As they reached the group, the superintendent stepped forward. Staff Sergeant Ortega, I want to personally apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. The security protocol was never meant to be applied to family members of graduates, especially not decorated veterans. Melissa nodded, accepting the apology with grace. Thank you, sir. I understand your security team was just following what they believed were the rules. The 2 guards looked relieved at her response. Bentley cleared his throat. Ma'am, we sincerely apologize for the distress we caused. It was never our intention to disrespect your service or disrupt your son's graduation. The superintendent turned to Wilson and the other SEALs. And to you, gentlemen, thank you for reminding us all of something important today. Sometimes we get so caught up in procedures that we forget the human element and the deeper principles that should guide us. Wilson nodded acknowledgement but said nothing. The message had already been delivered more effectively than words could express. Now, the superintendent continued, I believe there's a reception waiting, and Cadet Ortega's achievement deserves to be celebrated properly. He extended his hand to Melissa. Staff Sergeant, would you do us the honor of allowing me to escort you and your son to the reception? I believe there are quite a few people who would like to meet you both. As they walked toward the courtyard, Robert close by her side and the SEALs following a respectful distance behind, Melissa felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. What had begun as a day marred by misunderstanding had transformed into something unexpected and powerful. The reception area was crowded with families celebrating, taking photos, and congratulating graduates. As Melissa entered with her unusual entourage, conversations paused and heads turned. But this time the looks were different, respectful, curious, even admiring. Dr. Chen approached carrying 2 glasses of punch. She handed one to Melissa with a smile. I think you might need this. It's not every day you become the talk of a graduation ceremony. That wasn't my intention, Melissa said, accepting the drink gratefully. Sometimes the most powerful statements are the ones we don't plan to make, Dr. Chen replied thoughtfully. What happened today will be remembered by every person in that auditorium, especially the graduates. They just received an education that goes beyond anything we teach in classrooms. As Robert was pulled away by classmates eager to introduce him to their families, Melissa found herself surrounded by a protective circle of Navy SEALs. They didn't hover or make a show of it, but they were clearly sending a message. This woman is under our protection. She was both touched and amused by their quiet vigilance. You don't have to stay with me, she told Wilson as they watched Robert, proudly showing his certificate to an elderly couple who must have been grandparents or other relatives. I'm sure you have other responsibilities. We're good right here, Staff Sergeant, Wilson replied easily. Besides, Thomas wants to tell you about what happened to that point man you saved. Got himself a medical degree after he recovered. Operates a clinic now for veterans dealing with PTSD and combat injuries. Melissa felt her eyes grow damp. I'd like to hear about that. As the afternoon continued, what had started as a small group around Melissa grew larger. Other military parents sought her out, sharing their own stories. Graduates came to shake her hand, some mentioning their plans to enter service after college. Even the security guards, Bentley and Phillips, approached again to offer more personal apologies, which she accepted with genuine forgiveness. By the time the reception was winding down, something remarkable had happened. The room had transformed from separate family groups into something that felt more like a community, brought together by the unexpected display they had witnessed in the auditorium. And at the center of it all was a mother in marine dress blues, standing tall as she had done all her life, facing whatever came her way with the same courage that had carried her through war, loss, and the challenges of raising a son alone. The sun was beginning to set as the graduation reception wound down, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Most families had already left, heading off to private celebrations at restaurants or homes. Melissa sat on a stone bench near the fountain, watching Robert chat animatedly with a small group of his classmates. Her son looked different somehow, taller, more confident, as if the day's events had accelerated his transformation from student to military officer. Commander Wilson approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Melissa and sat down beside her. Black, 2 sugars, he said. You still take it that way? Melissa accepted the cup with surprise. You remembered that after all these years? Wilson shrugged. You get to know these things about people you serve with, especially when you're up at 3 in the morning planning operations. They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the remaining guests. The other SEALs had dispersed throughout the reception, some leaving for other commitments, others lingering to speak with faculty or graduates interested in special operations. I never properly thanked you, Melissa said finally. What you and your men did today, it meant more than I can express. Wilson studied his coffee cup. No thanks needed. What happened in that auditorium today, that was about something bigger than any of us. It was about respect, about remembering what matters. He glanced over at Robert, who was now shaking hands with one of his instructors. Your son's going to make a fine officer, you know. He has that same quality you always had, the ability to think clearly under pressure. Can't teach that. Melissa felt pride swell in her chest. His father was the same way. Thomas could always find the path forward when everyone else was frozen in panic. She paused, memories washing over her. I wish he could have seen Robert today. He saw, Wilson said quietly. Through you, through everything you taught your son. The simple words touched something deep within Melissa, and she had to look away for a moment to compose herself. When she turned back, she noticed the superintendent walking toward them, accompanied by an official photographer, Staff Sergeant Ortega. The superintendent called as he approached. I'm glad you're still here. There's something I'd like to propose. Melissa stood, military courtesy ingrained after years of service. Sir? Today's events have gotten me thinking, the superintendent said, his expression thoughtful. About traditions, about recognition, about the kinds of examples we set for our students. He gestured to the photographer. With your permission, I'd like to take a photograph of you, your son, and the Navy SEALs who made such a powerful statement today. Wilson raised an eyebrow. What's the photograph for, sir? For our Hall of Honor, the superintendent replied. The main corridor leading to the auditorium displays photographs of moments that exemplify the values we try to instill in our students. I can think of few better examples than what we witnessed today. Melissa was speechless. The Hall of Honor was famous among military preparatory schools, a solemn gallery where historic photographs and memorabilia inspired generation after generation of students. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. Say yes, Mom. Robert had appeared at her side, having overheard the conversation. His eyes were bright with emotion. Future students should know what happened here. Wilson nodded his agreement. I'll round up the team guys who are still here. Within 15 minutes, an extraordinary group had assembled by the fountain. Melissa in her marine dress blues stood in the center, Robert proudly at her side in his cadet uniform. Around them gathered 9 of the original 12 Navy SEALs, their naval dress uniforms creating a striking contrast against the fading evening light. This isn't just about today, the superintendent explained as the photographer set up the shot. This is about teaching future generations that sometimes standing up for what's right means literally standing up. The photographer took several shots, directing small adjustments in positioning. As they finished, Melissa noticed that a small crowd had gathered to watch. Faculty members, remaining families, and curious passers-by drawn by the unusual sight. Among them stood the 2 security guards, Bentley and Phillips, observing from a respectful distance. Melissa made a decision and walked over to them. I wanted to thank you, she said, catching them by surprise. Phillips blinked in confusion. Thank us, ma'am? After what we did? You were doing your job as you understood it, Melissa said. And in a way, what you did set something important in motion. She extended her hand. No hard feelings. Both men shook her hand, visible relief on their faces. As she turned to rejoin her son, Melissa heard Phillips say quietly to his colleague, 20 years on this job, and I'll never forget today. Back with the group, Robert was deep in conversation with Chief Petty Officer Ramirez, who appeared to be giving him advice about his upcoming time at the Naval Academy. The young man was nodding seriously, absorbing every word from the experienced operator. He'll be fine, you know, Commander Wilson said, appearing at Melissa's side. The academy is tough, but he's tougher. Like his mother and his father, Melissa added softly. Wilson nodded. And his father. Dr. Chen approached carrying a small box. Before you leave, Staff Sergeant Ortega, the faculty wanted you to have this. Melissa accepted the box, opening it to find a small silver pin bearing the school's crest. It's our Distinguished Visitor Medal, Dr. Chen explained. We don't give many out. The last recipient was a 4-star admiral who gave the commencement address 3 years ago. I don't know if I deserve this, Melissa said honestly. Dr. Chen's expression was warm, but serious. Sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected places. Today you taught our entire community something about dignity, about respect, and about the quiet courage it takes to stand your ground when it would be easier to walk away. As the gathering began to disperse, the superintendent approached once more, this time with a formal envelope in hand. One more thing, Staff Sergeant. This may seem unusual, but after consulting with several faculty members, I'd like to extend an invitation. We hold a series of guest lectures throughout the academic year on leadership and service. Would you consider coming back to speak to our students about your experiences? Melissa was genuinely surprised. Sir, I'm not sure what wisdom I could offer that your faculty couldn't provide. The superintendent smiled. You raised a son alone while serving your country through multiple combat deployments. You faced challenges most of our faculty can only imagine, and today you demonstrated grace under pressure in a way that spoke volumes. He held out the envelope. Just consider it. We'd be honored to have you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Melissa and Robert finally made their way to the parking lot. The day had been longer and far different than either of them had expected. Robert carried his graduation certificate in one hand and several small gifts from his classmates and instructors in the other. I'm sorry about what happened in the auditorium. Mom, he said as they reached her car. You shouldn't have had to go through that. Melissa shook her head. Don't be sorry. What started as an uncomfortable moment turned into something meaningful. Those SEALs, Robert said, shaking his head in wonder. I still can't believe they all stood up like that. That's the brotherhood, Melissa replied. Something you'll understand more as your career progresses. When it matters, we stand together. regardless of branch, regardless of rank. As they drove away from the campus, Robert looked over at his mother. "You never told me about saving that SEAL in Afghanistan, the one Commander Wilson mentioned." Melissa kept her eyes on the road. "There are a lot of stories I haven't told you, Robert. Some because they were classified, others because they weren't appropriate when you were younger." She paused. "And some because they weren't mine alone to tell." "Will you tell me now?" Robert asked. "I want to know." Melissa considered the request. For years, she had compartmentalized her military experiences, keeping the hardest parts separate from her life as a mother. But Robert was no longer a child. He was a young man embarking on his own military journey, one that would come with its own challenges and triumphs. "Yes," she said finally. "I'll tell you. Not all at once, but over time. You deserve to know." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the day's events settling around them like a shared blanket. "Where do you want to go for dinner?" Melissa asked eventually. "Your choice, graduation celebration," Robert smiled. "Actually, I need to tell you something. I got a text from Commander Wilson while we were taking those photos. He's invited us to join him and some of the other SEALs for dinner. Apparently, they have a tradition of gathering after important events, and they want us to be part of it." Melissa glanced at her son, surprised. "Both of us?" His exact words were, "Tell your mother this isn't optional." "We don't take no for an answer." A smile spread across Melissa's face. "Well, I guess we can't argue with Navy SEALs." "No, ma'am," Robert agreed with a grin. "That would be unwise." As they changed course toward the restaurant, Melissa reflected on the extraordinary turns the day had taken. What had begun with a simple ceremony had transformed into something neither of them would ever forget. A powerful reminder that true respect transcended regulations, that honor recognized honor, and that sometimes standing up for what was right meant literally standing up. 3 months later, a new photograph hung in the school's Hall of Honor. In it, a Marine Staff Sergeant in dress blues stood proudly beside her son in his cadet uniform, surrounded by 9 Navy SEALs at attention. Beneath the photograph, a simple plaque read, "2 guards asked a humble Marine to leave her son's graduation." Then 12 SEALs stood up, a moment of respect that crossed service lines and reminded us all what truly matters. May we all find the courage to stand when it counts. Students passing by would often stop to study the photograph, reading the stories that accompanied it, stories of sacrifice, of service, of a mother who never gave up, and of warriors who recognized one of their own, regardless of the uniform she wore. And somewhere in the Naval Academy, a freshman midshipman named Robert Ortega would occasionally get a knowing nod from instructors who had heard the story. He carried the lesson with him, that respect was earned through actions, that family extended beyond blood, and that sometimes the most powerful statements required no words at all, just the simple act of standing up when it mattered most.